Good afternoon, my name is Eugen and I love to travel, and I'm now in Berlin in what it used to be the Soviet sector. And yeah, because I'm a tour guide in Berlin, a lot of customers, a lot of Westerners ask me how life was in the Soviet sector and in the communist bloc. Because the story of the people in the Western sector of Berlin and their struggles against the Soviet Union are already being told and in spades, I would say. So you would be interested to find out how life was in the Eastern Bloc, in the Eastern sector of Berlin. So how did these people live? How did these people work? And what was different from the Western sector? So I'm here today to tell their story. So yeah, check it out. So I'm behind, well, I'm in front actually, in front of Schillingstrasse U-Bahn, as you can see behind me, on basically on that side over there. And yeah, in front of me, directly in front of me, is the restaurant called the Moscow Restaurant. It was a restaurant and cafe from the 50s, well, till the end of the regime in 1989. As you can see on the cafe, there's the Sputnik, the satellite, which was launched by the Soviets, and it was a symbol of the Eastern Bloc, together with, let's say, together with Yuri Gagarin, together with the wall, the Berlin Wall. And the memories are not so dear for most people, but of course there's a category of people who lived in the Soviet bloc or who lived in the Soviet sector of Berlin. And these people in the Soviet sector of Berlin had a different way of seeing things and had a different way of living. Hopefully, most of them were not forced, even though there was a certain amount of population who really wanted to escape the east towards the west because there were very economical prospects for them. But still, let's see how the Soviets did things in the end. So what we have here on the right hand side is basically a Soviet mosaic. And the Soviet mosaic is actually depicting the whole of the Soviet Union, from the west till the far east. Yeah, west till the far east. And you have the north with the reindeer, and the south, which is Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and different kinds of people, different kinds of customs, all that. So what you have in the top left hand side corner, you have Russia itself with Moscow and Leningrad and all these kind of things. And in the southwest bottom left corner, you have Ukraine, Republic of Moldova, and you have all these kind of, let's say, communal dances specific to these kind of places. And you have the Moscow in the center with the St. Basil's Cathedral, just where that bloke's hand is, arm. And then, as we go east, you'll find a lot of natural resources. You have a lot of oil rigs, like this. And also, as we go east, there are different customs, different religions even. There are people who are portrayed as being Muslim. Here. And as you go towards the far east, towards the right top corner, you have all those Siberian nations, and you have the Chukchi, you have the Yakut, and Kamchatka Peninsula, and all that. So, a Soviet mosaic to remember. This is my opinion. Oh, I almost did a Fidel Castro one on that very naughty step. So yeah. This is what the Soviets did, and is one of the most important mosaics you'll ever see, in my opinion. And we have here what is called the Karl Marx Allee, Karl Marx Boulevard. And it's the Karl Marx Boulevard going from Alexanderplatz, which is that way, that's Alexanderplatz, all the way to Frankfurter Tor, for about 2.5 kilometers. So it's a boulevard that really shows you Kommunalkas, Soviet communal buildings, communal apartment buildings, which are like multi-story apartment buildings basically, which had the main amenities that also Western apartment buildings had. Yeah. They probably are not as spacious, and probably the quality of the finishing is not that incredible, but still, honestly, they serve their purpose in the 50s because all of these were built in the 50s and early 60s. What you see? Let me get close to one so you can see better. This was built in the 50s and 60s, all this, and now it's being freshly recladded. That means the tiles on the exterior of the building have been changed, and it's probably, let's say, thermically isolated now, and phonically isolated, I hope. I hope for the noise level of these people, so I hope they can basically sleep at night, being near this main highway, main boulevard. Yep. Of course, on the left and the right of these magnificent boulevards are not only apartment buildings, but they're also Soviet administrative buildings, and they date also from the 50s. And probably they were planned, logically speaking, they were planned before the death of Stalin in 1953. Yeah, and they're done. They copy almost 100% what was done in Moscow during those times, or just, let's say, half a decade previous. And these two huge administrative blocks on the right and on the left mark, let's say, the official debut of the perfectly preserved road towards Frankfurter Tor, towards the gate towards Frankfurt, which goes in that direction. Now in Strausbergplatz. This is what is called Strausbergplatz. So it's a perfectly preserved communist boulevard from the eastern sector. Even if you are not an adept of this system, you have to admit that it's a piece of history that Berlin has to offer, and you should just respect history the way it was, try to preserve it, and even if it was like a cautionary tale of a system that doesn't work, you should still preserve it to let people see how it really was. So Strausberger Platz, and probably you can see two buildings in the distance on the right and left hand side of the road. That is where we're going, that is Frankfurter Tor. It's pretty interesting, nonetheless. So let's see how these really look like. And we are now just in the thick of it, as they say, and we are exactly near the apartment buildings that were built in those times here, near Strausberger Platz. Yeah. And they were built in such a way, for example, so normal apartment buildings, quite spacious for this type of apartments, and they were provided at the bottom of the ground floor with commercial spaces, because even during communist times there was commercial activity. There were cafes and there were things similar, if not as, let's say, good in quality, similar with the capitalist West. Yeah. And they are on both sides of the road. there were also barber shops in those times. There were also cafes, there were also restaurants, even though very, very few restaurants, but yeah. There you go. And you have also the tube stations, which are just inside the building. I like these buildings, to be fair. They remind you of Moscow and the Soviet Union. So just for your information, this boulevard, Karl Marx Boulevard, is one of the most iconic pieces of architecture still remaining from the Soviet era. Yeah, so it starts at Alexanderplatz and it ends in Frankfurter Tor. It's about 2.5 kilometers long. It's a straight line with a very wide street because they were anticipating the traffic to be incremental. Like the development of the Eastern Bloc would have been, let's say, skyrocketing in the next couple of years if things would have went to plan, but they didn't. So therefore we still have the quite large roads, quite wide roads for the 1950s when this was built, and we also have the apartment blocks, and these are like better quality kommunalkas than in other parts of the Soviet bloc. Yeah. So basically this is it. This is how the Karl Marx Boulevard really looks like in the end. Yeah. And our wonderful boulevard ends here in Frankfurter Tor. The gate towards Frankfurt, as you can see, and you have these two buildings that mark the end of the whole boulevard. And yeah, in the background, that, you see, the column-looking structure, the spire-looking structure, is actually the television tower from Alexanderplatz. So that's another very interesting Soviet-inspired monument from the DDR. But yeah, just to clear something, Frankfurter Tor, the gate towards Frankfurt, here there was a gate, of course, but it's towards Frankfurt an der Oder, so it's the Frankfurt in the eastern part of Germany at the border with Poland, which is strangely only 60 kilometers from here. Can you believe it? Poland is about 60 kilometers that way. Interesting. Yeah. But now let's go and see the TV tower, isn't it? And here I am in Alexanderplatz, near what is very famous, what is one of the symbols of Berlin, is the TV tower. Well, the TV tower, basically, it's a structure that was built between 1965 and 1969, and it was a propaganda tool for the DDR. Because here we are in the eastern sector. Still, we are in the city center of Berlin, but we are in the eastern sector. Because the eastern sector will also comprise the city center of Berlin. So the Russians had basically the lion's share of Berlin during those times. And yeah, the DDR, the Communist East German state, needed to do propaganda, to broadcast their propaganda through TV and radio. And the signals of the television stations were far weaker than the West German television stations. So they needed a very tall structure to actually broadcast their signal. Yeah? And they chose this place, Alexanderplatz, because this place was, let's say, destroyed, was cleared for the Soviet buildings, the new Soviet buildings to be built, as you can see behind me. So yeah, in this place during those times there were old buildings that were destroyed to make room for Alexanderplatz and these kind of structures. As you can see, the building is 368 meters tall. It's still the tallest structure in Germany so far, and it's just taller, just about 3 meters taller than the television tower in Frankfurt am Main. Yeah. So the sphere that you see towards the top of the structure is 203 meters above ground, and it's a revolving restaurant. Yep, it's a restaurant that revolves, does a 360 around its own axis while you are eating in 1 hour. So in 1 hour you can see all of Berlin from above without moving from the table. Of course, that is if the skies are clear. If not, you paid a lot of money for nothing. Anyway, yeah. So the architects have calculated that this structure, when hit by light, should project a star visible from the British sector, from that way. But because of those indentations on the sphere, I don't know if you can see them, but they're like pyramidal indentations on the surface of this sphere containing a restaurant. Because of those, it formed the cross, and the cross was also visible from the British sector. So it's like a big failure for the DDR. Well, not so big, but it was a bit of an embarrassment, because the phenomenon called light refraction also affects the communists apparently. So yeah, there you go. This is the TV tower. It costs about 30 euros to get on top of it. Yeah, and I recommend you do it once if you're in Berlin, and hopefully you have good stories to tell everybody else, because it's going to cost you getting up there 30 euros plus reserving the restaurant plus the food, so it's going to be quite pricey. But yeah, we're still here in Alexanderplatz, and we have this magnificent building here in front of us called the Rotes Rathaus, like we hear the people behind me. So yeah, Rotes Rathaus means Red City Hall. The Red City Hall is a 19th century building. So imagine, all of this neighborhood was cleared in the late 40s, early 50s, was destroyed basically to make room for communist structures. But this building was not. This building was kept. Well, you probably know that one of the colors of communism is red. The main color of communism is red, and the building is red. So the building was kept just because it's red, and it went well with the military parades, which were on the nearby boulevard Unter den Linden. There's a boulevard just in front of those buildings that you see in the distance, and the soldiers could see the Red City Hall while they were doing the goose step, and the tanks were rolling in as well. So it was a very nice, very communist landscape. So yeah, never mind. Now we're gonna go and see the Soviet memorial, the Soviet War Memorial from Tiergarten. Yeah, so it's very, very close from here, and it's close to the Brandenburger Tor. And yeah, it's a Soviet War Memorial between 1945 and 1989, which is situated in the British sector, in what was formerly known as the British sector. Why? Well, stay tuned to find out. And I'm now in Tiergarten, near the Soviet War Memorial in Tiergarten. And as you can see, as you're approaching the Soviet War Memorial, a T-34 tanks. T-34 tank waits for you. There are two actually, one there and one here. And the T-34 tank is one of the most produced tanks, well, the most produced tank in the history of warfare. There you go. And it's weighing, well, it used to weigh around 45 tons. The gun is 88 millimeters, so 88 millimeters of firepower, and a very nice armor altogether along this tank. Easy to repair, so we had nice armor, thick enough armor, a big enough gun, and it was easy to produce, simple to drive, and even simpler to repair. Yep. And you can see that is the door. Just below the turret, that is the door where the three-man crew used to go in the tank. And if the tank capsized, there is this hatch below, like underneath the tank, where you can just get out through there. So, pretty neat stuff. But the monument is dedicated to the dead Russians of World War II in this area of the world. And it's a monument that you can find almost everywhere in the former communist countries of Eastern Europe, with the Soviets seen as liberators. Yep, the Soviets were seen as liberators, and This is dedicated only for them, so it's 41 to 45. It's only the Second World War, the part of the Second World War which Russians were involved in. Yep, that's it. And there's immediately a logical fallacy behind all this. This is in the British sector, because the gate is just in that direction, about 200 meters, and all this is in the British sector. Well, as you know, the Russians were first in Berlin. They conquered Berlin, and they dealt the final blow to the Nazi war machine. So around 100,000 Russians at least died in the conquest of Berlin. So of course, they had a memorial here in Tiergarten, because it's close to the parliament, the Reichstag, and around 20 to 30,000 Russians died only trying to take the Reichstag. So it's absolutely logical and normal that the monument should be here. And in the Treaty of the Partition of Berlin, it said that in the British sector, in Tiergarten, there should be this monument. And every day, Russian guards used to be here on watch just until 1989, and they came from the Brandenburg Gate, which is 200 meters down the road, and they were under close escort from the British divisions, which were stationed here. Yeah. Pretty neat stuff. But now we're gonna see another Soviet War memorial, which is all the way in Treptower Park. So yeah, hold on a little bit and check out that one as well. And I am at the most important memorial for the Soviets in the Soviet sector in East Berlin. So basically, this is one of the most interesting things you could possibly see from the former Soviet sector. The Soviet War Memorial, these things you see in front, so there's at least two wings on the left and on the right, and in the center there's a huge statue of 12 meters high. Yeah. And this was built by Yakov Belopolsky, a Russian engineer in 1949. Sorry, 1949. So 4 years after the end of the Second World War. Everything about it is impressive. The scale of the whole thing. And you have all those, let's say, white monuments on the left and on the right. And all of these are ornated with Soviet mosaics. So let's see them. And yeah, on the mosaics you have scenes of heroism from the Soviet soldiers defending their motherland against the Germans. Yeah. You see some Soviet soldiers and some civilians in the ruins of a city, of a Soviet city, and in the skies are the planes of the Luftwaffe. Here in the next one, in the next mosaic, you have some partisans. You have mother, father in the forest with two kids, one smaller one and one teenage son, and they're all of them holding weapons and grenades, ready to ambush the Germans when they come through. And you also have the enslavement of the Russian peasantry. And there's a family which they're mourning a dead relative, and there's a lady strapped to a pole ready to be executed by the Germans. So pretty intense stuff, things to remember, and according to the Soviets, things that will never be repeated on Soviet territory again. Russian territory, more or less. And what you have in the next one, it's a division or a battalion of Soviet riflemen, ready to shoot, ready to attack. They have their bayonets fixed already, and in the background there's a Soviet flag fluttering in the wind with the picture of Lenin on it. Pretty nice, huh? But the pièce de résistance, as the French would say it, is this soldier, 12-meter sculpture, 12-meter tall sculpture of a soldier holding a child, saving a child, and that's in his left hand, and with his right hand he holds a sword that crushes a swastika. You should get closer a little bit. Yep. Hope it's clear for you in the video that there's a Soviet soldier holding a child in his left hand and in his right hand a sword that crushes a swastika. Yeah. So basically this was the tour of the Soviet sector of Berlin. It's basically East Berlin with small things that are not in East Berlin. And I hope you like it. So yeah, if you really like it, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell so you'll be notified when I'm posting a lot of content, more content. And yeah, you know the drill. So far so good. So what? Bye bye.